Please welcome Dr. Cornell.
Thanks, Carrie, for the introduction. I was told by Janet that your first choice today couldn't come. Honey Boo Boo apparently had other things to do, but good morning. I'd like to thank you and the NSH for the honor of giving this keynote address. It's a particular pleasure to speak in honor of fellow Vancouverite Charles Culling, to members of an organization I know he cared deeply about, and particularly when his home city is hosting this for the first time. I did not have the privilege of knowing Dr. Culling. What I have learned is that he was, as Carrie said, a unique, engaging, and brilliant man who dedicated his enormous talents and energy to the field of histotechnology. He undoubtedly inspired many of the wonderful and talented people that I've had the pleasure to work with over the last 30 years here in Vancouver. I'd like to mention two of those technologists at this time at the outset of the talk. I've been fortunate enough to work closely with Janet Tunnicliffe, a prominent member of your organization, and I've worked with Janet for many years. She is currently the lab scientist for anatomic pathology at the Fraser Health Authority. She's been a close collaborator on this project since its inception in 2004. Much of what I discussed today has been made possible by Janet's involvement and dedication to this. And I'd also like to acknowledge James Owen. He is our technical coordinator for telepathology. We recruited James from the RCH Histopathology Laboratory initially for what we had called at that time our imaging technologist, because the thrust of the research that we were doing at that time was on frozen section delivery. But it was a project with uncertain funding that was potentially to be short-lived, and that was 5 years ago. James remains the only full-time employee of the project. He's dedicated to digital pathology as a full-time job, and his job requirement has expanded significantly. He's our expert in scanning and image acquisition, in hardware and software, deployment to the multiple sites that use it, and to the multiple laboratory disciplines that we have engaged in it. He's also responsible for the ongoing training of people throughout our health authority and ongoing evaluations of the system. So many thanks to James and Janet for your involvement and dedication. I think Charles Culling would have viewed the development of digital pathology with insightful interest, and I hope this talk does justice to his memory. As histotechnologists, you will be on the front line of the move towards digital pathology, and it's likely to have a significant impact on your day-to-day work. The workflow, the slide preparation, staffing, budgets will all be things that will impact you directly. You will be much more than those who just feed scanners. You are likely to become the pool of people from which talent will be drawn to become the experts in many aspects of this field. Digital imaging has made enormous strides in the past 2 decades, empowered by changes of information technology and imaging technologies. There are currently many teaching, quality assurance, and consultative pathology practices that use these technologies, but the focus of my talk today is going to be on the routine delivery of diagnostic pathology. I think this is really the brass ring that people are looking for in this field. I do believe this technology will be used routinely in most histopathology laboratories, but I think the question remains when. The enthusiasts already claim that the digitized lab is imminent, that we are in the midst of the same digital revolution that occurred in medical imaging about 10 years ago. They claim it is the road to the efficient workplace, and some suggest that you're already lagging behind if you haven't embraced this technology and planned for its installation. My goal today is to put some of those claims to the test, then let you decide when you think it should become a reality for your laboratories. I hope to do that by briefly taking you on the journey that Janet, James, myself, And many of the staff from Fraser Health who have been involved in this project have been on for about the past 10 years. Am I clicking anywhere here? I'm having a little trouble with this moving forward. Sorry, guys. That's it. Go home, enjoy the sun. Is there any synchronization between my monitor and this? Okay, coming. I'll give you the speech I was originally going to give while we're waiting. Ladies and gentlemen, by your attendance here today, I know you're not part of the 47% who will never adopt digital pathology until mandated by the federal, sorry, RSH, I think that was for. The DSH, a whole-side scanner for all laboratories by 2015. Do we have an empty chair here that I can talk to? As Canadians, we love it when you have elections. It's great sport from this side of the border. Say again? Less fun on that side? Is there a way to coordinate? I'm still not coordinated actually here. I'm going to start actually and try and, but sorry, I'm going to turn my head because I speak to my slides a lot of times, unfortunately, rather than to what I've got here, for better or for worse. What I'd like to do in this talk is essentially go through 5 stages. I want to talk a little bit about why we got interested in digital pathology, what the basics of digital pathology really are, and just sort of talk about what you would need if you want to do it, what our experience is, and I'm going to allude to that of some of the others, both here in Canada and elsewhere, talk about what my impression is of what the future of digital pathology could be, and then offer an old-fashioned word, advice, in terms of those who might be interested in pursuing this. This is the Fraser Health Authority. This is where we practice, and I'm a member of this group that Carrie had alluded to. It's the Cody group, 48 pathologists. Doesn't add up to 48, you'll notice. But the people who are involved in imaging are 23 surgical pathologists, 7 hematopathologists, medical microbiologists, and the forensic pathologists. We have 12 hospital sites. We span an area of about 100 miles. We serve a population between 1.5 and 1.6 million people, and we have about 1,750 acute care hospital beds. And if you notice, the hospitals are sort of strung out really from one end to the other or over the breadth of that. We do surgical pathology at 4 sites within that, and those are the ones that are indicated with the larger red dots. And I'm director of surgical pathology at the one that has the green tentacles coming from it, and we do about 41,000 surgical a year. In addition to that, we do about 5,000 fluid cytologies, non-gynae fluid cytologies, 1,600 FNAs, and about 100 bone marrows. The reason I'm mentioning those things are, those are the things that I'm going to be talking about in terms of our imaging right now. To deal with the other 4 sites that are not core sites, we have surgical pathologists who function as general pathologists. They're responsible for those sites, and they go there for frozen sections either when they're called, or they try and plan their day around being there for the frozen section in the morning if they can get surgeons to cooperate with booking it that way. And then they travel back to the Royal Columbian Hospital where they sign out a usual workload of surgical pathology. It's a fairly time-intensive operation, and that's actually what got me interested in telepathology. What we're lucky about with this is that we have developed a very substantial network. And I think that's what's made some of what we've done now. It wasn't really as well developed at the beginning of this project as it is now, but we have worked towards having this regional network which has a single ITIM platform, which has a laboratory system which is entirely coordinated. We have a dictation system which you can access from any one of these sites. We have electronic medical records you can access from any of these sites. So in a lot of ways, it's a logical place to be looking at a project like what we embarked on. I became interested in this largely because for a 20-minute procedure for frozen sections, it's about 3 hours out of a pathologist's time if he has to go from our hospital out to his hub hospital, or out to his spoke hospital in terms of doing it, for a 20-minute procedure. And that's just seemed terribly inefficient from our point of view. So that's really what stimulated me to do this. And then about 10 or 12 years ago, when we started seeing a lot more reports coming out of the literature about telepathology, specifically for frozen sections, and they were coming from places like Japan, Norway, some places in the United States, Iron Mountain in Wisconsin in particular, the Air Force was trialing it. And that got me to go to the API in Pittsburgh, the first meeting that they had, and I saw that they had a, at that time it was the most advanced technology, and it was a robotic scanner in which they were doing kidney biopsies, reading them from Italy. And I was hooked when I saw all this stuff. But we didn't have any money, the usual. We are a non-research, non-teaching facility. Well, we're related to UBC, but our primary purpose is really just strictly delivering service pathology. But what I was interested in here largely was, were there efficiencies, were there value-added things that we could do from this? And that's the scope through which I'm looking at this. I am not a geek. I don't have even a, I don't know what you call those things that you can get the internet on. I have a cell phone, you know, a flip phone. I mean, I'm that kind of guy. But what I was looking for out of all of this was really, where would this apply? We were hearing an awful lot about what it would do and what it potentially could do for us. So that's how we got started on it. I'm going to go through a few quick definitions. The CAP here is probably not the CAP you're familiar with. This is the Canadian Association of Pathologists. We recently, a number of us across the country who are involved in this, wrote a position paper for them to really start circulating in terms of people who would be interested within the organization of doing digital pathology. And this is the first definition we came up to. You're going to notice, because we started this project largely as a telepathology project, that I seem to use the terms digital pathology and telepathology at times interchangeably. But that was largely because our focus was really the telepathology aspect. Since that time, I think what we've discovered is that this much broader world of digital pathology, where digitized images may not be traveling for diagnostic purposes, but are extremely useful. So this is the telepathology side, where you're actually taking these digitized images and really making a diagnosis on them and introducing it into the patient record. There aren't a lot of places yet that are actually doing this at this stage. What do you need to do this? First thing you need is a way to capture the image. And there's 3 different ways that you can do this. You can do this with still images, or stored images, static images. You can do it with streaming, and the streaming can be live or stored. The main advantage of streaming is, in fact, the live side. And you can do it with whole slide image, which is a stored image, but once it's available, you have essentially what you could do with the robotic stage. This is how you do it. Most of you are kind of used to that center bottom, and it may be where some of you are still at, which is the gross room setup that you put your camera, and we're advanced, we put a digital camera there. And that's what maybe all you have still in your setup. To the right above it is what we now use, which is a digital presenter. And in fact, it's an Elmo document presenter, and it works perfectly well for doing gross evaluations underneath and monitoring them in real time. And then the back of the camera, that's the back of my camera, which has both a 3D chip video camera attached to it, and below it is that little flat box is in fact a digital still capture camera as well. On the left-hand side here is that robotic stage that I talked to you about that initially seemed to be what was changing the world of delivering pathology once connectivity and the internet became a real possibility. And then on the right-hand side is the scanner that we use, an Aperio scanner, which is a 5-slide scanner. So on top of needing all that hardware, needing some of that hardware, and identifying which of the hardware is going to be the best for you, these are the other things you're going to require. Image management software, something to, once you've picked up the image from whatever your source is, to move it around. You need the connectivity, and the connectivity, depending on what your organization is, can have various degrees of issues associated with it. There are lots of places that have very robust connectivity between sites. We're fortunate enough to have that, but it certainly affects whatever your image quality is going to be and a lot of things about what you're going to do. Or, in this day and age, the internet. An awful lot is now being done with internet connections. And your image management software may in fact be something which also goes direct to internet rather than an in-house solution. Viewing. Whoever's going to be doing this needs good quality monitors, not necessarily the absolute highest quality monitor, because there are some limitations in terms of the images that you're going to receive, but you certainly need good quality monitors. And you need to deal with storage issues in terms of where these images are going to reside in your IT system. What makes digital pathology so attractive are all of these items. It's portable. And it's portable in terms of whether it's streaming or whether it's a captured image. You can place these images in this day and age almost anywhere, whether it's within your own building, whether it's off-site, out of country, out of province, but it's a very portable medium now. It's multi-site. You can have a distribution wherever really you want to put it if you've got the connectivity, and you can have simultaneous viewing of these images. It's a permanent record, unlike what we've been dealing with in, well, sort of like what we've been dealing with in glass. This is a permanent record of a single piece of tissue and a single image of a tissue. So rather than the recuts that people pass around and it might show something different, you are all looking at exactly the same issue or image, and you have it for a long time. And you can manipulate that image. So you can do image analysis on it, you can do quantitative measurements on it. There's great value that we didn't have before. So all of the potential uses, once you've sort of committed to exploring this area, these are the areas that we've identified, and actually I've left one off, which is research. It sort of spans an awful lot of this, but is probably one of the bigger areas still that digital imaging and digital pathology are expanding in or being used in. As I mentioned at the top, in fact, almost everything here of the bottom 6 items and throw in research are reality in many, many centers now in terms of using it for consultations, using it for conferencing, teaching. Diagnostics is still a bit of the hang-up in this, and I'll go into that in some detail based on our experience. And these are the efficiencies that I mentioned that you can get if you use digital imaging. You can expand the access, and that means your path services can either reach out to other places and offer pathology services that weren't there. You broaden your access to experts. You can do workflow leveling. One of the things that we discovered, and I mentioned that this started as looking at people traveling out to do frozen sections. Well, in fact, maybe the better way to use their time is, if they're on site doing frozen sections, is send the images to them. They can work while they're on site there, much to their chagrin. But if you have the setup where they can access a dictation system, they can access the patient record, it's as if they're sitting in their office. Sorry, I'm going to go back to that again. Put those two things together, reduce turnaround time as a possibility, freedom from the glass. A lot's been made of that. You know, we're going to be living with glass for a long time still, I have a feeling. But it does possibly change what our relationship is going to be to that in the future. And then image analysis adds an efficiency where if you're doing high volumes of things, breast receptors, Ki67 analysis, the possibility of actually loading those onto a scanner and having image analysis software do that overnight rather than it being part of the pathologist's workload and time adds not only a volume ability to it, but a consistency to it that you may not have. I've just gone backwards. There we go. The value added side. Once you've got the equipment, you have to decide for your own self whether this is the area to dive in, but certainly once you've got the equipment, using it for quality assurance programs, rounds, and I'll talk to you a bit about our use of it in rounds, archiving, metrics, as I mentioned, wider consultation. And by that, I don't mean when you are looking for an expert opinion because you're sort of out of your depth. Wider consultation can be within your own institution where you simply have 4 or 5 people look at a difficult case and confirm that they agree with you, that what you're suggesting is a subtlety is in fact what they would do with it as well. So, our experience. As I mentioned to you, we got interested in this about 2000 and didn't really have the opportunity to pursue it until within the province of British Columbia there was some money made available to look at new technologies as they affected the laboratory. And at that time, we were able to present our notion of, again, I'll say telepathology as something, because they were also looking for the possibility of building on provincial-wide solutions, and there was great interest in whether this would be able to change the mode of delivery to small sites, start linking some of our sites. We're a big province with lots of hospitals scattered all over the place, and just whether it would do. We kind of had to slow people down there because I think they thought the technology was a lot more mature than it is. And we had to work very hard to convince them that this was actually just a proof of concept and we weren't doing installations, that really people didn't know all that much at that stage about it. But we got the funding. These were all the potentials that we could use it for. As I mentioned, my interest was frozen sections and anatomic pathology. But as we started conceiving this project, we thought, well, we're going to get equipment on site. So what other areas within the laboratory might benefit from it, and what other areas should we be exploring it with? So hematology and microbiology were the logical areas in terms of doing it, and all of us then looked at these other areas that we could apply this to. So this is all still in our minds at this stage. What we knew we had to do was this. I'm going to take you guys through our steps because this may seem a little tedious, but I hope it's instructive for you in terms of if you're interested in this and not there, what hurdles you may face in terms of tackling this as something for your lab. And hopefully it will direct you to make it a little bit quicker than maybe what it was for us. But we had to do a technology review. At this stage, we sort of knew it existed, but we didn't know it was out there. We had to build a business case once we had selected what was there, and then eventually we had to get an RFP out there. This is what we discovered right off the bat. Now, this is 6, 7, 8 years ago, that at that time, this was a technology still very much in its infancy, despite what enthusiastic people were saying about it. And there weren't out-of-the-box solutions. In fact, we had seen an experience here in British Columbia where scanners had actually been put on site hoping to deal with a shortage of pathologists and sat in a box for many years before they were put in place because people really didn't understand, I think, what all was involved in delivering the technology. Even the image management solutions, there was no single simple image management solution. If you were looking at scanning technology, they often had an image management software program that you could work, but if you were looking at something more expanded than that and looking at other modalities, not necessarily there, or you had to go hunting for it. A lot still wasn't actually known about what the impact would be on the network of your organization. These are big files that you're moving through it and that you're wanting access to quickly. You want them to restore themselves quickly. We were very conscious of wanting to attract people to this technology in our organization, not turn them off by it. So it was important that when we started delivering images to them, that they be good quality images that they could rapidly move around in. And no one really could tell you how much ITIM involvement you needed when you were going to go through this whole process. What we conceived of was this single site deployment, that in the early stages of what we do, we would put all of this simply at Royal Columbian Hospital, where I am, where you could basically run up and down to the frozen section suite, monitor it, that you weren't committed to having to make diagnoses by this new technology, which you really didn't know whether you were capable of doing it from. So it was proximity to the OR, proximity to the team of people who were engaged in this. And then tech training, I'm going to go into that in a minute, but because of our notion that we would be potentially deploying this at multiple sites and sending a technologist to do the work rather than a pathologist as a potential time saving, we needed to enroll all the pathologists to teach the technologist about grossing. At our site, this was new. I know that in many of your sites that there's great variability, but our pathologists did all the work with frozen sections. Heme and micro were the same. Our director of the laboratories in both HemePath and medical microbiology were on site there, and they wanted to evaluate all the image modalities. They had no idea where they would fit in. So this was our initial goal, image quality on that. And we had made the decision we were not going to limit ourselves to a modality. The only modality we, in fact, eliminated was a robotic microscope, and some of that was for two reasons. One is we felt whole slide imaging was clearly going to be the technology of the future for handling this. We couldn't afford, frankly, to do both, which was to get a robotic scan or microscope stage as well and do it. So that was the choice we made. So while we were looking at 20 and 40x images and trying to figure out where they would fit, this is what Heme and Micro wanted to look at. 83 times scans, streaming, where it would fit into their operation, but again, as I say, really just were the images of any value to them at all. The technical coordinator role, I mentioned James at the beginning of this, was new to us, but because of this notion we would get people off the road, we wanted to recruit someone who had these skills, that they were a histopathologist first and foremost. They would be going to the OR, they would be cutting sections, and frankly, they would be bringing consistency to what was done. You have 12 surgical pathologists cutting frozen sections, and boy, do you get a great variability in what the slide product is, what the stain product is, everything, the tissue size. So we hoped it would do that. Secondly, needed IT skills and some enthusiasm about using the IT, a bit of project experience because this very much was a project at the time. Interpersonal skills, important. When you're dealing with 12 cranky pathologists who aren't sure whether they want their work taken away from them and aren't sure whether anybody else can do it as well as they do, and are absolutely convinced that they have to be hands-on for what they do, you need someone very skilled at putting themselves in that position and letting them slowly see that, in fact, maybe there are people who can do what they believe they can't. So that was where we started with what we were looking for when we recruited James. And I must say he was a great choice for all of those reasons. Subsequent goals, what we envisioned, and I'm still actually at the envisioning stage of what it was, that we were going to do all of this stuff. We were going to actually take it down. We were going to do far more detailed assessments of the technology, of the image, of the delivery of intraoperative consultations, measure how much time it took, measure what kind of storage it took. But we planned to, once we got going, do a lot more analysis on this. This is what our view was of what we needed from IMIT. We needed them to deliver us a high image quality, and that meant whatever the network was it going to be capable of taking it off whatever our image capture system was. That the network had the capacity to deal with these large files, that they could refresh them for us quickly, they could get them to us, and they could get them to us reliably, that they would help us with storage of the images. We were envisioning a scalable project. So in other words, that if this worked out at our single site at RCH, that we could then expand this over our 12 hospital sites. and we needed some help figuring out how that would be, or we thought we did, and clearly privacy issues with patient privacy. As we started presenting this to IMIT, they had a whole other series of things that were required for us, some of which overlapped, but certainly they brought a level of stringency to this that I don't think we had anticipated. We were messing with their network. The first thing that we had to do actually was we had to convince IMIT during a time of a lot of consolidations that they needed to dedicate staff to this because they had their hands full with all sorts of other things that were going on. And when we got it, these were the things that they wanted to be able to examine the hardware, the software, see what the impacts were going to be on the networks within the system, see what the storage impact would be. We had to deal from their point of view with privacy and security, which looked a little bit different from what we thought it looked like. And they also had a long-term view of what Fraser Health ITIM was going to look like, and they wanted to make sure that whatever it was we brought into the system was going to be kind of compatible with that vision. And I mean, the live meeting and the communicator, which we now use, and in fact, live meeting has been very helpful for desktop communications, were fairly easy, but they also wanted to know what were our plans for LIS integration. They had an existing PACS system with medical imaging. Were we planning on integrating with it? Could we integrate with it? Was this a standalone system? So in the end, remember, I'm sort of at the stage where we haven't bought any equipment yet. This is what we finally had to do to get our RFP together. And we had a lab manager who was overall overseeing the finances of it and was our IT or our liaison or our LIS manager. Janet, as the AP lab scientist, was our primary input in the technical side, but also the lab scientists from heme and from medical microbiology were involved. Pathologists, I was involved, as were the directors of hematopathology and medical microbiology, and we were the guys looking for simply the technical side of what it was going to be. The IMIT, some of these jobs intersected and some of them didn't, but we ended up with a whole lot of people from them being involved in bits and pieces through the project that I certainly people I didn't even know existed. Technical architects, privacy security specialists, hardware, software specialists, but all of these things which I think, depending on the size of your organization, the sophistication of it, you're going to have to anticipate if you want to go down this road. Ultimately, this is what we ended up with. This is what our frozen section room looks like in RCH. There's an Apereo scanner on the left-hand side. It's a 5-slide scanner, relatively small footprint, which was important to us because we don't have a lot of space in there. We have the Elmo image presenter in the center and the microscope for confirming whatever it was that we saw. This is the Elmo a little bit closer. This is what the images would look like if you were actually working on it. So when James is working on this image presenter, he can see what I'm seeing in my office when he's doing that with the image above. There's another Elmo in medical microbiology. They were trialing it with plates, with some really creepy stuff. But anyway, they were trialing it, and the microscope beside it. So again, and this was our live video feeds. We had live video in our system, both from the macroscopic point of view, our gross presenters, and from the microscopic point of view, from the microscopes. And this is roughly what it looks like. Our image management system, we decided to go with an Apollo system because at that time, our requirements, we had not gone down to a single modality, and we needed something which could handle the streaming imaging. And this seemed to be the best solution for what we wanted in terms of it was not internet-based, but it could handle every modality that we had. And what you're seeing there is the drop-down screen that can appear at any time when you're viewing microscopic slides. You can pick an area, and I can watch the grossing that's going on in the frozen section gross room, or frankly at many other sites, and then surrounding it is kind of the choices that are made. There are a lot better software packages now for image viewing than what this is. It's kind of one of the first goes at it. But for what we wanted, it worked very well. These are the kind of images that you would get if you're and are taken from the presenter. The drop-down menu that I mentioned to you is there, the gray, and if you look at that, what it's prefaced by, I don't know whether you can see, but all the various sites. So RCH for Royal Columbian, Delta Hospital, Surrey Memorial Hospital, Abbotsford. Whenever there's live viewing or someone's online with streaming, you can simply click that and choose what the source, whether you're doing a pathologist-to-pathologist consultation, particularly hematopathologists use this, or you're looking at a digital presenter in terms of a gross image. And again, now these images will expand up and make all the surrounding stuff go away if you want to fill the field with it. But you do get the slide, so you can see actually the identification within the slide. And up in the right-hand corner, you get the overall scan of the slide and the image so that you can pick out and see where exactly you are. It's very hard to see, but this field actually in this, there's a little black square in your guiding slide which tells you exactly which piece you're on. And in fact, that's very useful when you're going back and forth and get interrupted by phone calls reading something like that. As we expanded the system, AP stayed pretty much the way that it was. In other words, we continued to refine our experience simply at a single site, by and large. Drew in more pathologists to start doing diagnostic correlations between the digital image and the glass slide, doing image not quantification, but basically image scoring as to its adequacy for what we wanted. Heme and Micro actually moved ahead to a much larger deployment within our region. And they started offering up case review rounds between multiple sites, pathologist to pathologist consultations, tech to tech and tech to pathologist consultations and education rounds. So they sort of pushed in a second phase of what we did to have the image management software deployed to a whole lot more sites. At the end of what we did, these were some of the conclusions that we had. On the anatomic side was that there was no question that images generated from whole slide imaging were of an acceptable quality. They were of a diagnostic quality. We had now had 3 years of experience. We were showing these at rounds to all of our pathologists. We were doing these, we did a number of studies with them, and we were perfectly happy that these were great images and you could work with them. When we did correlations, the diagnostic accuracy between glass and digital was fine. That the software was acceptable for what we wanted to do. We could move around the slide very well. We could reconstitute images. It was intuitive. It was easy. You could teach people, and it worked well. Streaming images, we discovered, we were very glad we'd put them in because they, in fact, had some tremendous advantages. You could do remote grossing. By this time, we'd actually deployed some of those Elmo presenters to some of our smaller hospitals, where instead of going out to look at a lymph node, we have sort of a unique system here in British Columbia. Despite the size of our health region, where all flow cytometry is done downtown at the cancer agency. And often all they needed to do was get a tissue sample big enough to send down or have a look. And often you could do this on the gross pathology as to whether you thought it looked like it was likely to be lymphoma or lymphoproliferative disease. So we would guide someone sampling at one of our other hospitals. They would package it all up and then send the rest to us. And that saved, again, 2 to 3 hours time for a 5-minute examination. We started introducing it into education. It was hugely valuable. The role of the technical coordinator was, in fact, essential for our ongoing operation, to have someone with that kind of expertise doing what it was and bringing that kind of consistency. But what we discovered was that for frozen sections, it was not a cost-effective way of doing this. With the modalities that we had chosen, really at the end of it all, we had pathologists on the road, you might say, a third of their time in terms of doing it. And when you looked at the cost of installing a system like this, putting a scanner or something at the other end, it would not in any way justify doing this plus paying for someone else to go out and do it. Doable, but not cost effective. Heme, all modalities that they trialed were not acceptable for diagnostic purposes as far as they were concerned at that time. Lots of things that they liked doing with it. The streaming images for consultations and for conferencing, desktop conferencing, were very valuable to them. Far more than static images in their field, because so much of it is being able to just slap a slide on the stage and being able to show it to somebody else. If you use the scanner, you got into two things. You'd have to hand it off to someone, and because the scanners were not always in their proximity, and scan times were big. It was an hour sometimes to get a hematology-related scan. Or you had to go back and forth selecting the field that you wanted to scan. So streaming images worked very well for them. Micro came to some of the similar conclusions, basically, that whole slide imaging, interestingly, was good for sort of impressions of slides, but certainly when it came to the resolution for something like a gram smear, they weren't there yet. Streaming were of reasonable quality for them. Static imaging was still actually their favorite in terms of doing things, but they were going to continue to recommend using it for their educational rounds and documentation. This is what our current deployment in Fraser Health looks like. We have 12 sites. We have 3 scanners at 2 sites. Streaming cameras, as you can see, lots of them, mainly used by hematopathologists. Still cameras, still a role for them, particularly if any of you people are publishing. Often the image is still just a little bit better. Digital presenters, that gross presenter, 6 sites now and actually going to a 7th site probably in the next few months. The Apollo software was available on 138 desktops throughout the region, and we had trained, at this stage, James had trained over 250 people in terms of the use of all of this. So it gets well used. Our current state in all of this is in this, that we still use it for the off-site gross images and some intraoperative consultations. I can still sit in my office. James can go up and do the frozen, show me what's there. I just go up and look at the glass slide. It's made a 20-minute procedure a 3-minute procedure for me now. On a day when you have 5 or 6 frozen sections, that's a lot of time that you've saved. But again, it's the streaming imaging of interest. We're about to trial a multi-slide scanner to look at the reverse of what we said, the workflow leveling, which is it didn't make sense to now send someone else out to do the frozen sections, but while they're there, we can probably help them work a little bit more. And that's what the trial will be. And we'd like to have gross specimens, if possible, in our state. Consultations, we don't really do a lot. I do some in DermPath, simply showing people slides on a streaming basis when I'm going to sign it out, but we don't do a lot. HemPath does a lot, streaming images. It is an absolutely essential part of our conferencing system now. In fact, unfortunately, we still really only have one person who is very good at loading the slide scanners and maintaining them and knowing, and when he's away on holidays, we're kind of hooped. But we use it for all of our combined conferencing, which is usually with whatever the medical specialty or surgical specialty, medical imaging, and ourselves, and they love it. Finally, they can actually see what we're looking at. We used to drag around the video microscope and show it, and they politely nodded and had no idea what we were talking about. So this has been very, very well received in our weekly conference as well. It also is a huge opportunity for those within your department who aren't so keen on this technology to actually get engaged with it and start experiencing the images, experiencing the software, and what you find is slowly people come around. And we're not in a position, it's a private group of equals, and you can't impose this like you might be in some academic centers. You have to bring people to the technology. Teaching, very valuable in teaching areas. Quality assurance, I showed you that immuno that we had of a HER2. We now do most of our quality assurance programs with scanned slides, passing them around instead of slides circulating to 26 pathologists. You can imagine how long it takes to get those back and in what shape they come back. It can be done in a week. And hematology is doing a scanning project as well, which is in coordination with Downtown Hospital for setting up image files for techs, for doing both competency and just ongoing education, and this is probably going to expand to a provincial program. Medical microbiology uses a lot for archiving, for documentation. Image analysis we haven't actually gone to yet, but it certainly is possible we'll do it in the future. These are the other deployments that I'll tell you briefly about. Sorry guys, I'm going to be a little bit longer here. Vancouver Island, VIHA, has the same software system, or the same image management system that we have, which is the Apollo system. They've trialed it in streaming images for consultations to support pathologists in smaller hospitals, and have done it with some success, let's put it that way. The Interior Health here has whole slide scanners that they use for their conferencing, and they have a dermatopathologist who likes to travel, and he actually is doing his consultations and continuing when he's away through their scanned images over the internet. Downtown hospitals have used a very interesting scanning technology which does single slide scans from your microscope stage called Views IQ, and have trialed that in frozen sections as to whether it's a more cost-effective way of doing this. And in HemePath, they support the teaching. They've also done some trials in microbiology, and their main area has been in research, where they do use a scanner in research. The rest of Canada, Eastern Quebec did a very sizable project where they linked 21 hospitals together using an Aurora system and whole slide scanners on the notion that this might help retain people in these sites. They were having trouble retaining surgeons and pathologists. They needed to give them some support. They have a network which is tied into Laval Hospital in terms of doing that. And that's been going on for about 5 years, and they started delivering some information on that about 6 months to a year ago in terms of their experience. At University Health Networks in Toronto, they've used it for 6 or 7 years already in neuropathology consultations between Toronto Downtown Hospital and Toronto Western Hospital. They'd lost their neuropathologist at that site, but it was their major neurosurgical hospital, and they do it quite successfully and have done it and are quite satisfied that it's working very well for just doing diagnostic surgical frozen section surgical pathology for neuropathology. They're working on a project doing consultations with a hospital in Timmins, about 500 miles away, where they send their subspecialty scans or cases to be read by Toronto pathologists. There is a site there with Omnex GE is sort of setting up an imaging center in collaboration with them, and they're also talking to the provinces of Manitoba and Newfoundland about providing the subspecialty support for them. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but these are some of the other ways it's being used now throughout the world. Sweden has a site where they're doing routine surgical pathology at a combination of hospitals. I think it was about 4 hospitals, primarily because they had some difficulties getting manpower, but they're one of the few places that I know where they actually are using this routinely for diagnostic pathology. Norway has done experiments with frozen section and continues to use it for support for small hospitals for a long time. The University at Utrecht scans all of their slides, 20,000 surgicals a year, but it's a tertiary care consultation cancer hospital, and in fact they scan them after they've been signed out. But they do this so that they can manipulate, move them around. They have 900 conferences, so it's been a huge thing. And they have their own kind of storage system, which is sort of an interesting thing. In the US, it's being used in all of these various areas. So again, a very niche technology in many ways, but some very, very successful uses of various aspects of digital pathology. These are some headlines from papers about 2 to 3 years ago. There was an awful lot that hit the literature and a lot of our publications about telepathology. And a huge enthusiasm, basically, as you can see from some of these, breakthrough in imaging solutions, virtual diagnosis, immediate results. So trying to compare this to sort of what our experience has been now in doing this, and the experience of other people based on what we've seen. The major issues remain those on the left. The other ones, I think, will come along once you solve the ones on the left. There's a reason for this picture, which is that's a very robust vehicle. It's a vehicle which has big capacity and sturdy, but it's got a bit of a problem. You're familiar with glass slides. One of the problems that we have here is when you're trying to sort out what works for you is looking at what's on the bottom, what is reported by most of the people who are engaged in scanning, and what the reality is of what we do. And if you look at the usual and our average, the usual area that we cover on a slide is between 600 and 900 millimeters squared. And our average, actually, when you look at the scans that we do, is 800 millimeters. What's being reported when they're telling you scans can be done at 20x at 90 seconds is on less than a third of that space. And the 40x thing, interestingly, you'll see quite a discrepancy there when you look at what we scan time, an average of 25 minutes if you want to do it on 40x for our average slides, versus a report time of between 4 and 5 minutes. And a lot of what informs that is basically things like tissue thickness, the evenness of the tissue, whatever. So this is the ideal slide. This is the 15 by 15 slide. Well, the ones we produce look like this. Scan time 3 minutes and 17 minutes for 40x. This, 2 minutes, but 40x 13 minutes. 4 minutes, 24 minutes. This is a pretty average looking slide. 4 minutes to do it. 18 minutes to do it on 40x if you want a higher look at it. This is a pretty average looking slide in most labs I've been in. 9 minutes if you want to scan that. 41 minutes. So either you would have to change what you do in terms of how you present it, which likely means you're going to produce a whole lot more glass slides, because there's a reason we put that much tissue on slides, or scan speeds are going to have to improve. Now, I've done kind of an idealized lab based on our size. We produce, or have to have the capacity to put out 1,200 slides a day to handle our volumes. What we don't know is what the rescan rate is going to be on a lot of these, and that's, I'm saying we, meaning truly me and our own project. We have not used some of the new multi-slide scanners. This is based on our experience with 5-slide scanners and ones that are now 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. But from what I can see in discussing with other people in the field, there probably hasn't been a lot written on this. And then out of that 1,200 slides, how many do you have to do at 40x? Again, we don't really know until you put it to the test and find out who's going to select it. Well, you're up to now almost 90 hours of scan time just to do your routine surgicals. Throw in cytology, bone marrows, that all need to be scanned initially at 40x. And we're saying that in our hands it would take 25 minutes a slide to do that, plus the rescan rates. And then if you want to do bone marrow aspirates and you want to do them on a very high magnification, which is what our pathologists and I'm sure yours would require, you're talking an hour a slide. So to do our daily work volume of those things, not including grams, not including everything put on glass, 138 hours. That's a minimum of 6 scanners going 24 hours a day. If you want to have a backup scanner, if you want to have scanners at other sites, because this is broken up between your histology laboratory and our cytology laboratory, you might need more to deal with it. That's the reality as we see it today. The other issues that still have to be dealt with, resolution. We know what 20 and 40x can deliver, they're great. And frankly, they're absolutely fine for diagnostic purposes. We're still not sure what the higher resolutions in terms of the 60 and 100s, whether it's a problem with the resolution, which frankly I don't think it likely is. I think it's more the other issues around scan times. But that still has to be, I think, satisfied for many of us. The capture rates, as I mentioned, for these multi-slide scanners, which are influenced by a lot of things. And we don't know how often, if you run all those through, you're going to have to run a few of them through again. The workflow issue, if you want to introduce a scanner into your laboratory. And this is still the issue that you run into. Why couldn't you just give me the glass? It's a redundant technology still right now. And I mean, the optimists will say, yeah, but they jump higher. Here's the technical issues you're going to run into with the workflow. We don't even have barcoding in our laboratory yet in terms of tracking things, and yet barcoding is probably essential to doing multi-slide scanning and doing daily production pathology. Who's going to be your technical coordinator? My guess is you're going to need someone who's actually doing this as a newly defined job. You're not going to get it done properly if you try and just have somebody doing these things off the side. You're going to have to check image qualities and figure out who does it, what the capture rates are, and figure out how you would work into your work pattern. The rescanning, the 40x scanning, special stains, all of those things. Can you use those scans that are already going 24 hours a day, or are you going to need more scanners to do that? On the professional side, I honestly believe that this will take care of itself, that as people get more and more comfortable with digital images, that they'll be quite fine with doing it. But there is still this issue of viewing speed. Can you look at a digitized image as quickly as you can look at glass slides? Are you comfortable that the diagnosis you're going to make off a digitized image is one that you're going to put your name on? And people still struggle with that. Ease of transfers to experts. When I look at smartphones and what smartphones have done to people in terms of how much information they're getting right now and how much they're available, I frankly think this technology is going to do the same to many of our experts. It's going to be so easy to transfer to your guy who is the liver pathologist expert every liver slide or anything you have a question on. You're going to overwhelm some of these people, frankly. And I think it's just, we'll figure out how to deal with it, but it is going to be an issue. Storage remains a problem. I think it's getting better. The algorithms around storage that can compress images are certainly going to get better and going to get cheaper, but right now these are what we're looking at in file sizes. Our average file size for a slide is 350 megabytes. That's huge, frankly, when you start thinking about it in comparison to things like medical imaging. Core biopsies. If we look at many of our cores, they're scanned and they produce a file of 2.6 gigabytes, and the aspirates at 83 at times, 7 gigabytes. We figure for our site alone, and I honestly believe that this is probably on the conservative side, 80 terabytes a year of storage, and if we did it in Fraser Health, 200 terabytes a year. Let me put that in perspective for a few of you who, we have a PACS viewing system that does all of our CT scans, MRI scans, breast imaging, all of our imaging for all of our sites. It takes less than 10 terabytes annually to do it. Storage costs, and James and I have actually got, it's interesting, different answers to this in the last couple weeks when we were preparing for this. I've been told within our system, and this again varies on what your requirements are within your IT environment as to what it actually costs to store images. You can do within small laboratories and homemade solutions for a whole lot cheaper than that, but your IT people aren't going to let you do that. In our environment, $2,000 to $4,000 per terabyte minimum, and in fact, James has had quotes, depending on who we talk to in IT, as high as $10,000 per terabyte. I think the 2,000 to 4,000 is probably about right, but what that would mean, just doing our scan or doing our area would be about $400,000 to $800,000 a year. If you're going to embark in this, you have to decide, I think, somewhere in here. Do you have the money to kind of go whole hog on this, or are you going to be doing the pickup style version? The initial investment, if we were to do our laboratory right now, and I'm talking now about multi-slide scanners, not the scanners that we bought before, would, in my, what I understand of them right now, would be about $250,000 for that slide capacity to do it. Our image management software to deploy, so you're going to spend $3 and $3.5 million to set it up for a lab our size. That's not for our entire health region by any means. You're going to have ongoing costs. Storage is a big part of it. If you build in replacement, and it depends on how you handle it, there's a big chunk in there of $250,000. But even if you take that out, you're still talking $500,000 to $700,000 of ongoing costs. Our budget for our histology laboratory is under $2.5 million. It's a big commitment if you were to try and do that. So, where do I think we're at actually with all of this, having said that? I do believe that we're going to see a gradual transition in anatomic pathology from reading glass slides to reading digitized images. I think it's going to be slower than a lot of people who have been advocates of this have thought that it would be, but in this kind of technology, a rapid change could occur in terms of the imaging technologies, storage compression algorithms that will suddenly bump this up in terms of doing it, and that's what it's going to take. When these things occur, I think most but not all of the workflow issues that I've shown you will take care of themselves. But it is an interposed technology. This is still a redundancy, and glass isn't going to go away real fast that I can see. So that will influence still how the workflow goes. So I believe that we're going to be using this technology inevitably. I think right now, and I haven't talked about, and I want to be very clear about this, I have not talked about, when I do all this, what efficiencies or what things you could use these things for in so many of those other areas that are non-diagnostic. It's a great technology in those areas in terms of teaching and conferencing and research. So I do think you can get value-added things to your organization when you do this. So in my opinion, it is worthwhile if you can find opportunities in your lab to become familiar with digitized images. I think it is the future. There are lots of ways to start on a much smaller scale than we did. And there's lots of opportunities such as QA, conferencing. If your pathologists are interested in either getting consultations or being consultants, that's an area from a diagnostic area that they may be interested in. Advice, old-fashioned term, probably not in the business management things these days. But anyway, I think this is what you need if you want to embark on those. You need a champion, first of all, at your site in terms of people who really think that this is a technology that's worth exploring. You need very clear objectives if you want to set this out. This is costly. It's costly in money to get things. It's very costly in time in terms of the time commitment to evaluate and decide what you're going to do. You need a team approach, and I can't stress this enough. It is no good the lab going out and buying this stuff and then suddenly showing up to IMIT and saying, we want to have digitized images. You have to start at the beginning, getting everybody aboard to make this as a plan, and you have to really plan it out. I believe you should consider all modalities. I think it's been surprising for us that, in fact, streaming imaging has still to this day offered as much as it has in many of the areas within our laboratory, and has been, for certainly areas like heme and micro, the more valuable side than the whole slide scan. And I think you have to manage people's expectations, both positive and negative. You're going to get people who think this can deliver a whole lot more than it can, a lot more quickly, and you're going to get, in particular, we found the people paying the bills, the administrators, and you're going to get a lot of people who believe it's not going to deliver anything to them, and why should they bother? Thank you very much for your attention to this.
We're open to questions, answers. Anyone? Raise your hand.
So yeah, thanks very much. It was an excellent talk. I really appreciated it. I had several questions. Number one was if a slide is processed in one state and scanned in one state, and your pathologist happens to be on vacation, can he or she read that slide and generate a report from his distant location, or is he at all risk of practicing medicine without a license?
As a Canadian, I can't really answer that to the states and how they've decided that jurisdiction. It's certainly one of the areas, and if you notice on one of my things when I talked about some of the challenges that were left with this, sorting out those jurisdictional issues, I think in many areas probably remains to be seen. I can tell you what it is in Canada, and we were a bit surprised, was that there was a plan actually for some slides in British Columbia to be read by pathologists in Ontario, and when we talked to the college about it, they deemed that as long as there was equivalency in their training and licensure, that they would not require a BC license to do it. How they judge that equivalency, I don't know. It may have just been having a license.
If you don't mind, I just had one other question. I'm interested in building a slide reference collection for our residents. We have an Imperial scanner, and you know, it puts the patient's name. You can see the slide label with the patient name on it. Is there any concern that creating an archive of these cases would be a violation of patient privacy?
Yes. You got to get rid of it. Janet, do you want to answer that?
We actually are building exactly what you saw for our hematology department. And so what we do is when we scan it, we cover the label with a blank label, and instead of registering it into the software system as, you know, Mary Smith, we register it in as chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and that becomes the patient name. So we put the disease or just a number into the patient name to create it. The file comes up, so they get the information without the patient name there.
I apologize. It's just I was trying to do some back of the paper calculations to figure out the cost of storage of an individual slide. What was it, about $12 per slide, or did I do that right?
To be honest, I haven't figured that part out. You probably know better than I do right now, but that sounds like it could be correct given the image file size.
Okay, got another question back here.
Thanks very much for the talk and presentation. It's very interesting. Question about image analysis, in particular the statistical programs, the software packages that run with those systems. Have you found them particularly useful or not?
We have not used them. They are being trialed here right now at the Cancer Agency, as far as I know, in doing image analysis for breast receptor studies. I have certainly heard reports that people have found them extremely useful, and again, in high volume areas, they have found it time-saving for the number of breast tumors and things that we see in an area like that. We've felt we can probably do them quicker ourselves, let's put it that way, and we do have a QA program for consistency of pathologists' evaluation. But I think there's also software programs out there that will help you build your own image analysis parameters around what it is that you may be doing. I think it's a very logical place if you're doing high volumes for things like Ki-67, mitotic counts, these class 2 type of tests where you can then, you know, say with great certainty what your consistency is anyway, as long as you've sort of passed your QA on through that.
Okay, thank you. Another question? No?
In a day-to-day operation, how is that fitted into reading slides? In a classical setup, we pass the slides on to the pathologists and that's that. How does this imaging fit in? And the other part of the question is billing.
I think how it fits in is actually still, you know, the challenge for people. I think if you can take care of the scanning component, which to me is sort of the big side, having enough scanners, having the image there, if you can get that done, the workflow itself in terms of having the images available, if images were, say, depending on your volume, scanned overnight, available for your pathologist in the morning, it would be fabulous. You know, they're there and available. I think it's that getting up to that stage, which is kind of the issue of, is it really cost effective for you or time effective to be able to do that with the technology as it stands right now? But once some of those hurdles get done, I think from a pathologist point of view, it'll be great for workflow. I think from running your laboratory point of view, there's a whole lot of issues still that remain in terms of who does the scanning, where you get the scanner, how you fit in those extra slides that need to be done again, where the scanners reside, all of those issues. And I don't think there's good information yet. There's certainly lots of people who are, I think, studying that and trying to figure out, but I'm not aware of, as yet, a lot of information on how it would work in a routine diagnostic setup. Let's put it that way. because so much of what you read often is to very specific laboratory environments that may not translate into your own. You know, this is Canada, we don't bill. It's all free here.